Hello, this is the first UNED VoiceLab Live this year, 2022.
Happy New Year!
Happy New Year,
yeah.
Yes. We are here, of course, with Filipa Lã, and we have a special guest today. And let's introduce you, Dr. Christian Herbst. For those of you who don't know him, I actually doubt that there is anyone here that don't know. We are here, of course, with there's sound coming in from somewhere here.
Yeah,
okay.
I just killed it.
All right.
It was my live stream via YouTube.
All right. So Dr. Christian Herbst, it's an Austrian voice scientist. He studied voice pedagogy at Mozarteum University in Salzburg, in Austria, and now he's the head, I believe, of the Department of Vocal Pedagogy and Voice Science for Vocal Pedagogy at the University of Music and Performing Arts in Vienna, Austria. So it's a lot of science, it's a lot of vocal science, and the best is that he's a former teacher of singing, so he knows exactly what he's studying when he's doing research.
So Christian, tell us more about yourself and how you be involved in research about voice. How did you start? I know you for many years now, since the first time I've met you, was it 2003?
Something like this. So we have our 20th, we can celebrate our 20th.
Yes. Oh my God.
You don't look a day older.
Oh, thank you.
I do.
You only because of the beard.
Yeah. Day already then, yes. Yeah, well, how did I start with this? Well, I kind of got, I was not a very successful singer, and I wanted to be. So my first wish for a profession was Papageno when I was 6. And that was the time when I started to sing, actually, in a boys' choir. And incidentally, in parallel, 10 years later, I started to program. And that seems to be very useful. And 10 years later, even, so when I was about 25, I kind of started to apply programming to music in a very loose way. And 10 years later, when I was 35, I decided that I want to be a voice scientist. And why did I do that? Because I was not happy with all the concepts of smelling the rose or imagining colors or anything. And I got really intrigued about the physics and the physiology of the voice. How does it really work? And I had a couple of key experiences. Somebody dragged me to a conference in 2002, into a voice conference. I understood, I think, 5%. But I saw this and I said, yeah, it was the AQL in Groningen, the Netherlands. And this is, of course, a very special conference.
That was a bit later than 2003, I think. That was, but anyway, but yes, it was a very special, it was when someone retired.
Not the PASS, the AQL was before. I was there twice, in 2002 and 2000, I think 3 was the
I see.
PASS, or something like this. And I said, okay, this is, I need to understand all of it. So at the moment, I would say I understand 40%, but I have still a couple of years to go. So that's.
Oh, you are too humble. Come on. Let's deconstruct that and prove to everybody who is listening to us that that's not quite right, that you understand much more than 40%. And to do that, I start with the following question. From all the programs that you know from other colleagues that have developed softwares and the ones yourself have developed, like the Wavegram, the VRRP, etc., 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 which ones do you think most assist researchers, teachers, and students of singing to understand more about how the voice works, or how the physiology and acoustics of the voice might help this teaching learning process and research that is fed by its interaction.
Yeah, this is a tough question, and if you expect me to actually name a name, I shall need a name some of my own software, which is not very user friendly, nor shall I name some other software, because I think it's not the software that is relevant. It's the concepts, that it's the understanding, it's what happens between the two ears, basically, of the person who applies the software, right? Because if you think about it, and there is more, if you think about it, let's talk about an application for capturing a voice range profile. You have data acquisition, you have data analysis, and you have data visualization, and then maybe you have another step of data conceptualization for interpretation. So there is so many things that can go wrong. You have a lousy microphone or background noise or whatnot. You don't understand how to control the gains in your preamp. Garbage in, garbage out, right? Then there is the analysis, and we hope that the software has some good algorithms for that. But I encountered some that are excellent and some which are interesting and sometimes really creative. And then there is the visualization, like VoiceVista, for instance, it's even in the name, right? So that is important. But the most important thing is the assessment of and the interpretation of the data. And if you don't understand what you're measuring, what kind of data you're acquiring, how could you make sense of that?
You see, much more than 40%. Isn't that right, Mauro?
I have to tell you, this is a division. Percentage is a division by what I know divided by the amount of what is.
Yeah, but then there, the self-perspective is always debatable by someone that is from the outside. Yes, yes.
I will shut up. Yeah.
We should not go in that direction, but perhaps in the direction of the next question that Mauro will ask you.
Yes. So let's see if the percentage starts to grow here. You have published recently 2 fantastic articles on registers on Journal of Singing, which were basically this summary with some additions of other publications you have about registers and how they constitute the pitfall in singing pedagogy. So I'd like to ask you, what do we know and what do we still don't know about registers? Easy question.
The most important thing is, I think, it's not a summary of my papers. So my papers feature very take up a very small part in this, because this is a huge review article series with, I think, over 200 references, and it's really amazing how much brilliant work people have done over the decades. Really clever people with fantastic, brilliant ideas, and what this review tried is just to put it together and to try to understand that. So we're looking at this at several levels. So proprioception, psychoacoustics. So basically, first one is, how do I feel the registers? It's the oldest concept, like voce di petto, voce di testa. So where do I feel the registers when I phone it myself? The second is, how do I perceive registers? The third is, what about laryngeal mechanisms? Fourth layer is, what is the influence of the vocal tract? And fifth layer is individual teaching concepts. So people saying, and I think to a certain degree, really in a justified way, scientists haven't figured this out yet. So this is my teaching concept, and I think it works. And I think if you ask who is right, what is the right way of looking at the registers, I think it's the answer has to be yes, but you have to declare on which level you're appreciating the issue, because we know this. You have laryngeal registration, you have huge massive events, but you couldn't, in some singers you can't hear it. So on a perceptual level, there is no register break or no discontinuity, whereas there is something happening in the larynx. Or you can look at singers, they have like a rock solid voice source. It doesn't change the quality. Still, you can hear massive changes in the sound. So it must be something in the vocal tract. So things like that.
My question there would be, you are talking about trained singers, but when you start with
Filipa, you got very soft here by me.
Yes.
Mauro, could
yes, your sound changed.
My sound changed?
Yeah.
Is it good now?
Yes.
It's better.
Okay. So I was asking you, you are talking about trained singers, but when you start as a teacher with a naive singer that comes with no training at all, wouldn't you agree that vocal registers, then those layers could be reduced to one that is laryngeal mechanisms or laryngeal events, or in that sense, when you listen to those changes in quality are related to the fact that you have not learned yet how to mix or in a perceptual way reduce those changes, effects of changes of mass and vibrating mass?
Yes, absolutely. I think the physical layer of voice production is always there in anyone, every time, everywhere. And the physical and physiological layer includes the voice source and the vocal tract, and these have influences. And the question really then is kind of, I feel like I'm a politician here because I'm not answering your question, but I'm reiterating my message here. But really it boils down to this, right? All those layers are always present. And in the assessment of whether this is something is a registration event or not, and if it is, if you think it is, where does it come from? Do you assess it acoustically or like perceptually, which you do in the voice lesson, because there is nothing more, unless you have some physiologically based feedback, right? Like EEG or more heavy things like transnasal endoscopy or something like this. But in a typical voice teaching situation, you only have the perceptual level to look at, and from that you have to guess what is happening in the larynx, which I think is super hard. We even fail to identify registers when we have all the evidence, because the concepts are not entirely clear. This is what I learned from writing this paper. So the simplified definition, yeah, you contract the TA muscle and then it's chest, and if the TA is relaxed, then it's gonna be something else, and we could call it falsetto or head or M2. Do we really know this? And there is people who go very easily say, oh, that's a TA dominant voice. How can they know? So our knowledge of this concept of TA contraction is based on, I think, two sets of EMG studies, one from the early 70s and one from, I think, some 10 years ago. With, I think, the one they had 4 participants, and in the other study they had 5 or something. So this is not sufficient to actually establish a theory. Mm-hmm. And then if you think of the old Van den Berg experiment, where he had the larynx and he phonated it, excised larynx, and he just pulled on the vocal folds, basically on the thyroid, and he had beautiful register jumps. Well, there is a TA muscle in an excised larynx, but there is no innovation. This muscle is dead. It cannot contract again. So, okay, and then there is the idea with the 1-1 vibratory mode that has to be there. But again, we do not have any solid empirical verification of hypotheses, which brings me to a huge issue I have currently with voice science, but I think that makes it very easily, very, very interesting, which is that people tend to believe or tend to put too much faith into models and hypotheses that are not tested by empirical evidence.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Although, yes, we are still away from testing it with massive numbers of people, because that's another story. But we really need testing, not just based on models, but on how we behave as humans, because that's why we sing, because we are humans.
Because if you go back to this to the issue of registers, okay, so it's a TA master. Okay, we need EMG studies. Please bring me ideally 50 participants who would like to get needles in there.
But even though EMG is very sensitive where you put the needle to study the contraction of the muscle, so do you really believe in that data? Well, maybe, but if it's externally, or I don't know.
Yes,
I think we still have to improve the ways of studying the voice to understand that, isn't it?
If you follow the Housson's theory, the neurochronaxic theory, and then there was a brilliant paper by a German called Dedo, I think Walter, but I'm not sure about his first name, but Dedo was his surname. And he brilliantly showed that those pseudo contractions, muscle contractions that Housson based his entire theory on, like the cyclic contractions of intrinsic laryngeal musculature, is just an artifact of the EMG technology. So,
but you know what scares me? There are teachers of singing that produce books of pedagogy saying that when we go to a whistle register or a very high in a falsetto register, our vocal folds do, those contractions to be able to vibrate more or whatever. And then others say that there is a titanic fusion of the vocal folds, and therefore there are not two vibrating anymore, but just the two together. Anyway, based on Housson theory, there's lots of ideas growing still in the 21st century. Anyway.
It's how many years? 60 years later?
Yes.
So, yeah, and just to, I know you need to move on, but just to follow this, to finalize this thought about laryngeal evidence of laryngeal mechanisms. Well, one theory is about the phase delay and the one motion and the bulging of the vocal fold. And well, how can you measure this the best? Well, you would have to have like a coronal section through the larynx. You cannot have this. The best we can do is go to a sagittal section with a hemilarynx, but then again the TA is dead, so it doesn't work anymore. So what do? We go for a what's the other one? The third dimension. Well, you know what I mean. We look from the top.
Sagittal, coronal, and axial.
Yes. So we look from the top is the best we can do, and we try to interpolate and interpret, and then we see mucosal waves. But of course, we only see them from the top. But for instance, the most interesting part of what happens in the glottal cycle, which is when the lower margins of the vocal folds start to open, we never see. So it's really interesting how sure we think we can be about these concepts where there is really very little empirical in vivo evidence. So I rest my case.
So actually we still don't have the technology to know much about registers.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move on.
Like X-ray with real-time vibration and things like that. So people are moving forward
towards that direction.
Yeah. We need some 3D scans or something like that. All right. So, and also, I think the translating research into voice practice, because everything we're discussing, is one of the big challenges we face. We have some teachers of singing just run from the voice science. Some of them think that it's a bit scary. I don't need it. And maybe because sometimes the publications are not very accessible, not only by physical means, but the language. Sometimes it's it's a bit inaccessible. But one example of how to use the research for improving teaching is the idea you like to talk about of the membranous and cartilaginous adduction of the vocal folds, the one you described in the Oxford Handbook of Singing, and also in this review. Also, you mentioned it, no? If I'm correct.
Yes, and there's other papers on Journal of Singing about that.
Yes. So could you tell us a bit? Could you tell us more a bit about this framework, and also to give us some examples of how to apply this idea of membranous and cartilaginous adduction for improving voice control and singing?
So first, a little bit of trivia. This was actually the problem or the question that made me do a PhD, because that question was with me for a very, very long time. And actually nobody had an answer, because the simple idea is you can, everyone can actually, if they know how to do it, produce 4 very distinct voice qualities at the laryngeal level without any vocal or without much vocal tract modification. So, but if there are 4 distinct qualities and there are supposed to be 2 main registers, things don't add up. So, which means the concept is too simplified. And actually, what I got from books, medical books, and they deal with speaking. Typically, it's that chest register or modal voice has full glottal adduction, or mostly or almost full glottal adduction, and falsetto or head voice or whatever the next one up is. Whatever you want to call it, I should say, tends to be breathy. So basically, you have 2 sets of parameters, which is one is really the function of the TA, and the other is the function of the adductors, so LCA and IA, and they are in those concepts. Basically, they just form like a one-dimensional model. So you have modal with full adduction here, and you have falsetto with insufficient adduction here, and you can move here. So I said, okay, why? Well, and if I say I said, lots of credit go to Jan Schwetz, who was my supervisor, my doctoral supervisor, who helped me a lot developing these ideas. So why don't we just disentangle these 2 physiological parameters, because they are different, most likely caused by different muscles, intrinsic laryngeal muscles, and see whether we can work with these muscles individually. And we have shown this in this one study in JASA, that even untrained people who have never received a single singing lesson in their life can quite easily access this. So how is this relevant? I can give you the example, or stereotypical example of amateur female singers, untrained females, for instance. So, and in my experience, the toughest part in the voice range to fix and to work properly, particularly if you go for classical kind of classical singing, where the passaggio is typically a little bit or a lot lower than in CCM singing. It's the middle octave which is the toughest one. It's actually, for me at least, I think I always feel it's very easy to fix the second octave. So from C5 to C6 and even above. But like what happens in the lower middle octave, so from middle C upwards, is the toughest. Why? Because what people typically do is they start out at the lower pitches with chest register, and it's adducted, and then they should let go of the TA, most probably. Well, I have never measured this with the EMG, so I have to rely on these few studies. It's the same problem. We are all suffering from this lack of evidence. But most likely, it's a reduction of TA contraction and increase of adduction to counteract, because the TA adds, well, it increases glottal resistance if you increase the TA, because it bulges the vocal folds and you get the vertical phase delay going. So it's a very complex movement. You have to relax one muscle and contract 2 others. All of them are probably that size, and all are innervated by the same nerve, which is the recurrent nerve. And I claim this is a very, very hard maneuver, and people don't get it initially because they really have what we find in the concepts for speech. So what they do is actually they feel the voice gets thin when they switch to the upper register, so they just push the lower register upwards. And so how can you fix this? Actually, it's very easy. Unless somebody has an organic or a severe functional voice disorder, most of the females, most of the women, and actually also girls in their puberty or post-puberty, they can call. It's not yelling, it's calling. It's like, woo! And that's a full glottal adduction. And it's in falsetto, or it's in M2, let's call it M2. So then rather than pushing, like going stepwise, semitone-wise upwards and hoping that they get rid of the chest voice and do the proper thing, we know we can establish the proper thing already in the upper octave, in the lower half of the upper octave, and we can move this downwards. We can train them to move this downwards, and only really to the point, to the passaggio, and then they can switch. So,
two things I want to add there. One is that actually there's lots of cases like that of women, because I work a lot with female singers, and what we do with that behavior of starting from the calling higher, coming down and building the voice from the top to the bottom instead of from the bottom to the top, we are also using the abductive or abduction, how do you say this, inflected abduction movement of a high lung volume, right? So because the tracheal pull is abductive, and therefore if you start at the high lung volumes, high pitch, and come down, you facilitate that process of achieving what you've just said in the middle register. So that was wonderful. And the other thing I want to add to that is that I didn't find very easily that naive non-singers would access these mechanisms unless they have visual feedback of airflow. Because I was doing a study with Rita Patel, Brian Gill, and Johan to measure these things with high-speed imaging. And actually, we just got the participants to do different types of phonations by using real-time visual feedback of inverse filtering. Otherwise, they wouldn't know the difference. So
let me tell you, sorry.
Thanks for bringing that on, because that sent us also to the question that visual feedback of what we cannot see sometimes, or I would say most of the times, help a lot to experiment different things with the voice, because we don't have access to those muscles, as you said. It's very difficult in a conscious way to say, okay, abduct now or abduct more, or and I also used to say that from all intrinsic muscles we have, only one is to abduct, the rest is to adduct. So it is really, the larynx was done to be a valve to protect the lungs. So it is really a difficult thing to learn to use it not as that and something else to produce nice sounds.
Precisely.
So and not screaming. So that's why we have this tendency of, when we come from the bottom to going to the higher registers, to scream, because this is a valve and it's not comfortable, and we need to deal with that by learning mechanisms. And what do you think, now changing a little bit the theme about source filter interaction, and how does this interaction affect singers?
We're currently with Jan Schwetzis on the team, and Isao Cuda is known in the voice world, and two other colleagues, one from brass instruments and one from bioacoustics. We're currently, we have submitted this, so this is, I shouldn't be talking about this too much, but we're attacking this issue face on. I think a coupling between the tract and the source can be very relevant, particularly in singing. Most likely also to very, very small degrees in speech. And we have the same problem that we had, that I already mentioned. We have lots of models, and very little empirical data in vivo. And for what I please, if you hear this, come to the past 7, the International Physiology and Acoustics Conference, because there we will have an entire session dedicated, not exclusively, but to a bigger part to this particular question. And we'll have 2 heroes from the field talking about this, who are Ingo Tietze and Johann Sundberg. And it strikes me that Ingo's models predict very clear interaction, and then and Filipa, you know this, of course, because are you the first author or a co-author?
No, I'm a co-author of the
did
work.
this study with the singers in the Met, and you found because
and
so,
also Johan will be talking about another study that I'm a co-author together with Svante Granqvist, and long tubes.
Yeah. And that's
and putting cotton and not cotton. And I'm not talking more about this because you will go to PASS, and then you can
No
hear
spoilers.
about all this. Yes, I'm not be a spoiler.
Yes,
So,
good.
yes. So, but it will be curious to see what was your opinion. It was not a question that to trap you or anything.
No.
Just to, because it's. I did ask Ingo Tietze in a conference. It was in I think was in the Voice Foundation last conference, whether his models have the nasal tract as well as together with the oral tract, and he told me that he doesn't. So I guess that makes a difference, but I might be wrong.
Yeah, the point that we're making in this publication, and I'm convinced of this, is there is one concept. I wouldn't call it a parameter, but it is a concept, and it is the coupling strength, which is kind of elusive and has not been defined properly. And for instance, if you look at a trombone, so the resonator drives the vibration of the lips. So this is a strongly coupled instrument. Likely it's connected to the input impedance to the resonator. But it is kind of elusive, and conceptually publications are not very strong about this. There is one publication by Lucero, 2012, where he modeled this, where he showed how you can increase coupling strength. But other than that, there is not so much. So I think Tietze's models implicitly assume that these are highly coupled, but I think this, if there is such a concept like coupling strength, and we haven't defined it, this could explain that you get different data empirically than you get in the model. And then, if you think of it, if we have the time to talk about this, when we go back to the one-mass model of Flanagan in 1968, and you have just one mass, and there is no vertical phase difference. It was evident from those simulations that you need the time delayed action from a coupled vocal tract in order to even get the vibration going. Whereas if you have a two-mass model where you have this additional degree of freedom, where you have the vertical phase difference, then you actually don't need the vocal tract. It helps, it can also help, but you don't need the vocal tract to get the self-sustaining oscillation going. So we could, is my little speculation for this little conundrum. You looked at highly trained operatic singers, and maybe there is a natural selection. And of course, people who have a thicker mucosa, who have a voice source that leans towards longer close quotients just by itself without having to work with the adduction, you have this very strong vibratory component. So you do not need to have to rely on what the vocal tract does and where the vocal tract resonances are so much. It's my speculation. I have no proof for this whatsoever. But if we assume that there is a natural selection, so that only people with a thick mucosa and a strong voice source actually make it all the way up to the top, to the Olympus of unamplified singing, then it is conceivable that those people have this very strong mucosa. They have a very strong vibratory, like rotational component and strong mucosal waves, so they don't have to tune so much. And that could explain the diversity in your empirical data, which means they just didn't rely on the coupling too much. But if you spin this, if this is a scary thought, because if you spin it further, means if this is true, this is all speculative. Those people are people who, on average, had to learn formant tuning much less than other people. What happens if someone, worst case, becomes a teacher, never learned about formant tuning or vocal tract resonance tuning, and has to teach a student who would actually have to rely on vocal tract resonance tuning a lot? Well, I can tell you what happens. The teacher would have to transcend their singing technique and would have to learn about vocal acoustics and would have to understand other strategies for amplifying the sound and producing nice sounds. So,
but we don't need to go. But I agree with you. We don't. This applies not only to source filter interactions. It applies to many other things that happen in training a voice. You have to transcend your experience, empirical experience, so that you can really help someone else, because otherwise you have a limited toolbox to teach. And that does apply not only to non-amplified styles of singing, but also amplified styles of singing, because education is about that, is to be centered in the student and not on yourself. So it's like the patient and in voice habilitation, you should center on the patient, not on the person who is treating the patient. So otherwise they could not habilitate voices. Well, and to pass.
No, just one more thing on this theme. Based on your experience as a teacher also, and for those who are not familiarized with this concept of vocal tract interactions and just want to sing and teach better, how do we increase or decrease the coupling strength of the vocal tract and the vocal source?
The predictions by Lucero say that it is a narrowing of the epilarynx tube. This is also what Titze does in his models. And
I could add something
else. We reproduced this also in this paper. So we had also a little model that nicely showed this, how the input impedance then like really increases, triples or something if you have this. So and this is of course relevant for classical singing, where all the good singers, their money notes, you don't see the vocal folds because the epilarynx is pulled backwards mostly. Yeah, you can even hear it in my voice. I don't like to do this because it is tedious, but it is an instant changer of overtones and everything. Then it is a subglottal pressure, or it is supposed to be. This is what the model predicts. And there was a third influence, but I forgot about this. So read Lucero 2012. It's a full paper.
I could say that my experience also as a teacher and a researcher, and I would talk about the strength, the bandwidth of the formant, of the first formant. If you play around with the bandwidth of the first formant, you can decrease the interactions. Yeah. So, and the way of doing it in a human body is, besides what Christian told, is about how much nasality you add to your sound. And in teaching, there has been this misconception, I think, that, oh, you don't, nasalization is awful and you don't want to sound like that. Of course not. But you don't
Sometimes you want
to sound like that either all the time. So it's a question of balancing that. And I think we will start looking already. Well, I don't want to be a spoiler, but so I don't talk more about bandwidth, but do come to pass and you will hear it.
Oh, I will be there. Yes.
Well, I'm telling to the others who are listening to us. So yes.
Basically, we're talking about narrowings. So narrowing the epilaryngeal tube, narrowing the velopharyngeal open, the port. With the straw, we have a narrowing in the lips. There's
it's narrowing everywhere except in the vocal folds.
Yes. Also, if you look to grunge singers like Audioslave, Pearl Jam, they used to sing with the back of the tongue really contracted, things like that, and it helps to sing this kind of music with this kind of tongue position. Maybe because it narrows the tongue with the pharynx and create a narrowing there, and use it. So it's a non-studied narrowing.
I think you're onto something here, because if you think of classical singing and if you read pedagogical texts, so many of them are about maximum opening. Gola aperta is the high ideal, but yes, some regions have to be open, but others, if everything is open, you probably cannot create. It's physically impossible, most likely, to create the desired sounds. So there needs to be some constriction, and this brings us to the issue that physical terms and physical concepts are often wrongly or inaccurately translated to layman's terms or everyday expressions, and vice versa. Because and I think this is a huge issue. I wouldn't say it's a problem. It's an issue that needs to be addressed, and people need to be aware of this. Take the term pressure. So how often have you heard about a singer from a colleague, or even having said it yourself, oh, this is with too much pressure? Now, what kind of pressure do you mean? Right?
Maybe it's not pressure, it's resistance.
Is it vocal fold? Is it vocal fold collision resistance. Force?
Yes.
Is it something else? And there are terms that are negatively associated. Pressure, constriction, narrowing are all terms that are typically avoided in vocal teaching. Now, to really, because this discussion has been quite technical so far, to try to take this and put it into the studio. Christian, let me ask you a question. No, so I'm asking myself the question: how does this all translate to the studio? Because I'm asking me this the entire time, both when I teach or have taught the recent years, and now when I do full-time voice research. How can this be translated, and what kind of language are we? Should we actually use this physically correct language in the studio? And I think the question is no. With
the
a
answer.
couple.
The answer is no.
No,
not the
we
question.
We shouldn't, because but with a couple of considerations here, and one consideration is, as a teacher, I think it really helps to understand those concepts of voice acoustics and physiology, but you have to save your student from them. This is for your own head, and not for the heads of for most students. For some are really keen on that, but they end up being voice scientists themselves.
Some of them ask, what's going on?
Yeah, some of them, I wouldn't go so radical there, if you allow me. I would say it depends on the level of the student and also the purpose of the student, because we have students who want to be performers, but we have students who want to be voice teachers. And
yeah, there is difference. Absolutely.
And there's a difference there. So I think training voice teachers, we should explain why we are doing certain things and not in another way.
Absolutely.
But if we are training performers who are having so many other things in the mind crossing when they are on stage, they cannot be concerned with this technicalities of how to build an instrument, because they need how to be expressive, how to communicate, how to interpret the music and be musical. And all these things are the ones who gives the money after all, not if they have too much resistance or too less resistance in the vocal folds. Precisely. I've heard Roberto Alagna in the Met singing Puccini's aria, from I am having a blank, but it's a very, very sad story. She dies with pneumonia. What's the name of the opera?
Yeah, Mimi, La Vie de
Mimi, and yes, and he failed all the top notes in the area that the tenor sings there, and of course I was disappointed, but do I just judge the whole performance because of one song?
Yeah, but that's a different issue.
Yeah, so that's why I
not
said
related to what do we tell our students. And I wanted to add, there is a second aspect of this. So basically, even as a voice scientist, you can be very, very creative in your language of what you tell the students, and sometimes even deliberately tell them things that are physically incorrect, just as long as this stays within the session and within the context of the teaching. I think there is something that is really actually it's a bad thing that so many people or not so many, but you see them once one or the other, they don't understand the concepts of voice production. They see that their language that they are using actually works in the studio, and they should be applauded for this. So these are sometimes really fantastic teachers, but then they walk out on a stage in a conference room or in a conference or in a symposium and say, this is how the voice works, this is what physically and physiologically happens, and this is inaccurate. And I think people should be more aware and more humble about these lines of demarcation, if you like. So which kind of hat are you wearing? When you have a teacher's hat, you are allowed to be very creative and can do many things, but don't carry this teacher's hat and then pretend to be a physicist or a physiologist, and the other way around. So I think there is, and this is where the translation should be happening.
Okay. Yeah, shocking news. a lot of metal singers want to know about voice science because they want to know what they're doing, because metal singer probably are used to do very different things with voice. So they want to understand what they're doing, probably because they don't want to be hurt.
But there is nothing wrong with the interest.
Not unusual to have metal students asking, okay, but physiologically, what's going on? And then I had to explain, of course.
Well, it's like parenting. We cannot believe that we are perfect with our parenting. But as long as we are honest with our children, I think we are in a safe zone. So if we are honest with our students to the extent of what we know and what we still don't know very well, and our speculations about what is the evidence allowing us to build up on, then we are good, nice, okay teachers, because no one is perfect, and but being honest is a way of being good, I think. So moving to teaching questions, Mauro. You want to ask something about?
We going to have the PAS, okay? You mentioned PAS a few times, which is the 7th International Physiology and Acoustics of Singing Conference.
Yes.
Okay, and so please tell us more about PAS.
When is it?
When is it? What's it? What's that?
What people can do to register? Do they still can register? How much do they pay? Do they have to be voice scientists to register, or could they be singing teachers of singing? Tell us.
Can you please allow me to share the screen?
Oh, of course.
Yes.
Done.
Because that's easiest. And here it is. So
Fantastic.
It is the 7th International Physiology and Acoustics of Singing Conference, which is nice because this is, other than the PVOC, which is a brilliant conference, for instance, biannual biggest European voice conference, there is a lot of speech, and there is nothing wrong with speech, of course, but singers and singing has special questions to be addressed. And so this is a scientific conference about the physiology and acoustics and some more topics of singing. But if I say a scientific, well, and it's on February 24th to 26th, so it's soon, it's purely virtual and it's super cheap. So a regular registration is 100 euros only for 3 days. You get the full package. We have a fantastic schedule. Please check it out. So the URL is, well, if you Google PAS 7 MDW, that's the abbreviation of my university, then you'll find it. Or you can go to www.mdw.ac.at/instas/PAS7. That's a little bit cryptic. We have a fantastic program with 3 very interesting keynotes by Nathalie Henrich, Anne-Maria Laukanen, and Helena de Fern. Well, PAS used to be a biannual event, but for some reason, and I think it was not interest, but just lack of organizers, it didn't happen the last 10 years. So one keynote is what has happened in the last 10 years. Then I already mentioned this, one of the special sessions. We have more. We talk about gender in voice science and about evidence-based vocal pedagogy. And there is a couple of, or a number of brilliant and very interesting free papers and also poster presentations. So please join us. Please be there for the entire 3 days or just for an afternoon. Whatever. I think it's really affordable. Students pay half. I think it's 50 euros for students, and that includes doctoral students. And this is not a conference only for empirical scientists. This is also not a conference where scientists tell voice teachers how they should teach. I think it's the other way around. The questions come from the pedagogues, and here a couple of topics are being investigated, and I hope for a lot of knowledge transfer, and not only knowledge transfer but also transfer of understanding between those areas, if you like, being like the practical vocal pedagogy on one end and empirical sciences on the other end. And I think it's never a race who is more important, who is better. We're all better, and we're all important, and we can help each other, because if you're a scientist and you don't have the proper questions, what can you do? You probably could get grant money and you could write publications, but how relevant is that?
Yes,
yeah.
That's the question. Yeah. Yes.
So,
thank you so much, Christian, for accepting our invitation and being here with us today. We really appreciate you and appreciate your company. Next live will be with
Matthias Heldner.
Yes, Matthias Heldner from Stockholm University. So another suite in our inviters, and will be in February. and be with us that day. We will post you the date, but we could tell you in advance that will be on the 4th of February.
It's the 4th of February, yes.
So do not miss it. Any final remarks you want to say, Christian?
Well, thanks for having me. This is a great honor.
Our pleasure.
A great pleasure. A final message, I think, is that it is okay to doubt. I think people should doubt more. They should believe less and doubt more. And please, that also applies to every single word I have written or anybody else. As soon as there are absolute truths and we start to believe in them and start to defend them, or we feel that we have to defend them, we're in trouble.
Yes, I agree. I had a teacher of biochemistry that used to say, do not believe in everything that comes on books. So with those words, we say goodbye to you. And thanks for being there in that side of the screen. And please join us in our next live of UNED VoiceLab. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much, Christian.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Filipa. Thank you.
Thank you, Mauro.